at Stanford, and since that time has published extensively in the areas of psych processing of media, of course, presence, telepresence, persuasion and attitude change, political and health communication, a lot of really interesting areas. He was also one of the founders back in 2002 of the International Society for Presence Research, which is a very important society, puts on a good conference every year. You know, every morning I typically have my coffee reading the daily message that he sends out on the Presence listserv. If you're not signed up to it, it's actually pretty good. There's a lot of things that turn up, that Matt thinks up, that you don't see on a Google alert, or once in a while you do, but it comes a day later. But it's always interesting, and in some circles he's known as the god of presence, but we'll see how it shapes up today. Thank you.
Hey everybody. Wow, this is pretty impressive, given that this is the last day of the conference and many of you were up late last night. Thank you for being here early this morning. I think this will be an interesting change of pace talk and very relevant to what you do as a community. I've talked about presence in various contexts, and this one is particularly interesting and relevant to me in part because I have a congenital nystagmus. For those of you who know what that is, basically the result is that my corrected vision is pretty poor, about 20/50. So you're all kind of blobbish in the distance here, but so I have that among other reasons makes me interested in sort of the overlap between presence and health and rehabilitation. So I was really pleased to be invited to speak. My background is in communication, and I've been moving toward a PowerPoint style, a presentation style that's very picture heavy and word light, and so I know that that's on purpose, and hopefully it'll allow you to focus on a little more on what I'm saying and not tax you too much at this early hour. So here's an overview of what I want to talk about. Just an introduction to telepresence, what the sort of rationale for it is, and some definitional issues, and then a bunch of examples to really illustrate how broad a concept it is. And then some brief comments and examples about why I think it's important, and including why I care about it. And then a discussion of the status of the scholarship on presence, and then we'll turn to health and rehabilitation and conclude with some takeaways. So the idea of presence, as many of you probably already know, comes from looking at the evolution of technology. And I could have gone back to smoke signals and cave drawings, but just keeping it in the last century or so, sometimes it's easy, especially I know many or most or all of you are very technically oriented. If you are so involved in it, it's easy to forget how far we've come, how quickly, and the fact that this level of change in technology is available to the public so easily now. So here's just a bunch of examples of this. Television, from the primitive furniture to today's flat screen HD sets. Movie theaters, from the silent movies to the IMAX experience. Special effects from the old moon, Man of the Moon, or Man is the Moon, and all the way to today's CGI, where you're not always sure what's real and what's not. Gaming, I used to have one of those on the left there, Magnavox Odyssey games, very sophisticated, huge paddles so you can play Pong on your TV screen, all the way to the Kinect and all the stuff we have today. Room-sized computers to the iPads and tablets and other things we have. I'm going back a little further here to go to the telegraph, but from the telegraph to the landlines to FaceTime and all of kind of mobile connectivity now. Social networking, social media that we didn't even have until relatively recently. Virtual world, Second Life in this case. Artificial intelligence, this is on the left, Watson, beating the contestants on Jeopardy and Siri on the iPhone. And then coming soon, supposedly, we hear Google Glass augmented reality and Oculus virtual reality. BCI, brain-computer interface, has rapidly evolved, as you know, to the point where now it's a consumer product. We have increasingly often ambient intelligent environments that bring all of the technology together in sort of a seamless way. And who knows where we're going, hopefully not there. And actually, it's not wireless, so it's not as sophisticated as we might want, but jacking into the matrix or whatever. So all of that is to say that technology has made the experience of using technology more, and people throw these words around. I'm sure you've encountered all this before, but natural, intuitive, comfortable, easy, simple, automatic, and real, which I put in quotes because it's such a loaded term. But I think we get the general drift here. All of this happens because the technology sort of fades into the background and you become less aware of it, and it's not technology, it's the thing that you're dealing with. I would use the example of television in telling students about this. You don't think every time you sit down to watch a television, gee, those pixels are coming together nicely to create an image that looks like the picture of a person. You just sit there and watch the person. So here's the ISPR, International Society for Presence Research definition that was developed by presence scholars back in 2000. We have a long, sometimes raucous electronic discussion about how we should define presence. And this is the short version. There's a much longer explication statement on the website. A psychological state or subjective perception in which, even though part or all of an individual's current experience is generated by and or filtered through human-made technology, and then again in red, part or all of the individual's perception fails to accurately acknowledge the role of the technology in the experience. So it's about the technology disappearing from the experience, or not seeming like what we know it actually is. And having been to all but the very first of the 14 presence conferences that ISPR, and before that the people associated with ISPR put on, I've heard these and read these and many other terms associated with presence, and it's really annoying. As I'm sure you've had the experience in your particular areas where when people create new terms and subtle distinctions, and everybody gets a little confused about what we're talking about. We have a book chapter, and I'm going to avoid showing you the webpage at the moment, but this is actually online. No need to try to read that. I'm not expecting you to squint and see that, but basically you can see how complicated a typology of the definitions of presence is. And the online version, the webpage version, you can click on any of the boxes and it'll come up with a long explanation of how that fits into the typology and give examples and stuff like that. So just to make the point that it's not so simple to define presence or non-presence. But basically it comes down to the most popular distinction people make is between spatial presence, where the illusion that you have that the disappearing of the technology into something else has more to do with physical space, the environment, the location, and social presence, where it has to do with people or other social entities. And I'll explain that within or as medium in a minute with the examples. And there are other emphases that people give to the definitions. Some focus on realism, perceptual realism, things look and feel and sound like they would in your natural experience, your non-immediate experience, and then social realism, where things happen as you would expect them to. And then there's the engagement or psychological immersion dimension of presence that many people emphasize as well. And you can sort of distill the confusion, the big points of confusion about presence down to telepresence as a technology. Now that Cisco and other companies are making very high-end, in each case, they started with a room-size product where there's a meeting room and there's high-definition monitors and almost zero lag connections to another identical meeting another city or country, and you feel like you're there having a meeting together. This telepresence product is a technology, of course, and so people use the word frequently to talk about telepresence as if it's a box that you buy or a room that you go into, and it's not the technology that we're interested in, it's the technology that produces the experience. It's the experience that we're interested in, at least in the academic community, focusing on presence. And then there's this really annoying use of the word presence instead of telepresence. Telepresence is longer and sounds I guess to some people more technical and specific, so people shorten it to presence, which is perfectly fine, and I do that all the time, and I will in the rest of this talk. But try searching the literature about telepresence using the word presence, and you find the word presence obviously has all kinds of meanings and is used all over the place. I've even tried it with the directory of the papers for this conference, and if you say presence, you get a whole bunch of things that come up that are not sense of presence or telepresence, and so that's an annoying confusion. And also I should mention that presence is similar to, overlapping with, related to other concepts, but not the same as, and I put a few of them here, flow, Csikszentmihalyi. Ooh, nobody questioned me about the pronunciation of Csikszentmihalyi. The concept of flow, where the whole point is that the challenge level goes up a little, and that keeps people in a sort of groove, a flow state in a task. That doesn't necessarily, often the state is also a present state, but it doesn't have to be. Immersion is a confusing term because it usually refers, we had another long debate about this in the presence community, usually refers to the physical objective truth that your senses are immersed. How many of you, you have a head-mounted display on, well, so your vision is immersed. It's not a sense of immersion, and so that gets to be confusing. And attention and involvement don't necessarily imply that you're paying attention to or involved with something where you have this illusion that the technology is not at play. So here's some examples. First, the spatial presence. The classic example, teleoperation. In both cases, the person at the left is operating the remote equipment on the right. Flight simulators, military training. Obviously, there may be people involved, but the emphasis is on the space here. Sports, games, I love the one on the right. I think if you buy that product, it should come with the hat and the rest of the costume, right? And exploration, this guy, you may have heard of Ballard, who does these Titanic and other undersea expeditions and lets people experience it via telepresence back at home or at museums or back at home on their computers. And then sometimes just fun stuff that you encounter. On the left, an advertisement for a suspension, a brand of suspension. I don't know if you can see that, but it says, feels like Pioneer suspension. And on the right, some chalk drawing that's art on the street. Kind of hard to believe that that's not real, but it isn't, of course. And so here's some social presence examples, again, not having to do with health, just in general. This is the big thing that people talk about now when they use the word telepresence. Changing the way people work so that you can meet in person. That's one of those telepresence rooms that I mentioned. And then there's the telepresence robots. I like the idea of walking down the hall and waving to your colleague who's only there virtually. In higher education, bringing people together, classrooms of people at different locations. At home, the picture on the left is one of a series of Skype portraits that this artist got started, where he proposed people doing this, and now it's like a viral phenomenon. Everybody's making pictures of themselves at the remote locations as if they were standing together. And Skype is you could say a very low quality presence, but you do get the sense of being together for free, and think how that has changed lots of people's lives. In particular, there are military programs to allow people at war at the front to visit their families. It's becoming increasingly popular in the courts and in politics. That's Governor Rick Perry, when he was a younger man, appearing via a telepresence podium system. So that's just a picture of him being put on a glass pane there. It looks very sort of ghost-like, but compelling. And then that headline there about Cisco giving money to, giving its telepresence systems to other countries in hopes that they'll get along better. And then it's good, of course, for PR purposes. In the arts, people are dancing, singing, playing instruments together remotely. Pink Zuckerman on the bottom there. There is actually a category of art, of digital art, a subcategory of digital art called telepresence art. The thing at the left, telematic dreaming, you lay in a bed with a projected image of somebody who's laying in a bed on the other side in another location, so you can see the image of the partner there. And Eduardo Cac, I have not seen, and I don't think I really want to see the rabbits and robots. See that? Humans, bio-art networking, humans, rabbits, and robots. I'm not sure. As an animal lover, I'm not sure I want to see that. You see telepresence all the time, even just watching television. Cisco has a deal with MSNBC and other outlets, and they get their little plug-in. Sometimes you even hear the woman's voice saying, interviews conducted via television. Just watching television, there's a whole literature going back to the 50s in communication about how we develop a simulacrum of a social interaction, a sense of social interaction with people that we know, who we see regularly, who we know by their first name. On television, I apologize to the international people here. I didn't know who I would use for the slide for you, but these are all American and in some cases internationally known people who, over the years, we've identified as, you know, oh yeah, it's Oprah, it's Uncle Walter, we used to call Walter Cronkite, Johnny Carson. Glenn Beck, I don't agree with his politics, but some people find him a compelling person, and all these others. So there's this sense that even though it's a one-way communication, they use the media, they use the television media cleverly, and you feel a sense that you need to respond to to what they say. You can often encounter real people or artificial people in daily life. There's a virtual bank, you know, it's an ATM where you can actually interact with the teller. Airport, these are becoming popular in airports. There's just a woman there who's not real, who can tell you, can answer questions and tell you where to go in the airport. Let's see if I can bring up this video of the woman on the bottom. Oops. Just a short video to illustrate this same.
For those with ears, let them hear. For those with eyes, let them see. GravityDesignStudios.com. We speak for your business.
Speak for your business. So, you know, that's a couple years old. They're getting so sophisticated, and if you call the Amtrak train system here in the States, you'll get Julie, who will take your reservation. She's not real. There's just this sense that you're dealing with social entities that may or may not be real people. And then, again, there's fun examples that you just encounter in everyday life. The left is, I don't know where that is, but on the right, it's actually an advertisement for a window cleaner. If you can see, it's just a picture of a woman against a window with the product on the bottom there. Okay, and one other subcategory I mentioned before about social presence. In some cases, it's the medium itself that we respond to as if it's a social actor, not somebody or something within it. And this literature started, became sort of crystallized by this book that Byron Reeves and Cliff Nass wrote, The Media Equation, and there's a cartoon that sort of represented. You deal with the technology itself, you feel like, well, it must be a social entity. That's sort of the way we're hardwired, right? So all these toys and, Ivo, the Sony dog, and Clio, and the Activates, they do minimal cues, but they evoke in us these social responses, and then more sophisticated robots and androids. If you've not seen it, the one on the double picture on the right is a memorial tribute to the science fiction author Philip K. Dick. That is him as an android programmed to answer questions and be interviewed, in this case, about his life and work, authorized guy who created it, Robert Hansen, was on a flight and he forgot a head on the airplane. And the head of Philip K. Dick, he'd probably appreciate the irony, became missing. I don't think they ever found it. And here's just a couple examples. I took these pictures, one in Paris of some art there that makes it look like a person's walking out the wall, and then after a snowstorm here, just less than a mile from here where I used to live in Center City, a snow person in a casual position after a snowstorm. And I thought, man, that, when I first saw that out of the corner of my eye, granted my vision is poor, but I thought, well, that's a person. Oh, no, it's not. But in that instant, that felt like presence. So why does all this matter? As I tried to illustrate here, it's increasingly common. It's central to many different fields and endeavors, and I've only touched the surface here with that. There's a lot of money involved, especially in the business world, and especially more recently in the last 8 years or so. There's all kinds of interesting effects, and I'll say more about this, not just on individuals, but couples, families, organizations, every level of analysis. There's all kinds of fascinating ethical questions that presence raises, and it's just cool. I have to include that. So there's lots of benefits. I've illustrated some. Here's a couple more as space exploration there. But there's a lot of dangers too that people talk about, and this is where some of the ethics comes in. Fake is the new real. We can't trust what we're seeing, what's real. And there's all kinds of interesting social media examples where people create Facebook pages or Twitter accounts or whatever for people who don't exist, either historical figures or people taking over other real people's accounts. And then the whole violence issue. If we can make very compelling, realistic, mediated experiences feel like you're there and you're having this experience, and then we make it violent, then that raises all kinds of issues. If we make it sexual, especially if it's with children, there's this whole issue that's already gone to the Supreme Court several years ago, the idea of, is virtual child pornography illegal? Is creating child pornography using virtual actors illegal? Should it be? Is it immoral? And then the whole drone attacks issue where you're using teleoperation to, people sit in New Mexico somewhere in the desert in a bunker and push a button and drop a bomb on somebody in the Middle East. And there have been a series of books, you may have seen some or all these. People, they may not use the exact word telepresence or presence, but they're talking about a lot of these same issues. And I said I would mention why the topic matters to me in particular. And here are some of the topics, and you'll see that they sort of gravitate toward the bigger picture, more abstract, but some of the things I found really fascinating. We just, after presenting this at a presence conference several years ago, it was packed too, by the way. I don't know why everybody showed up for a talk about presence and sex, but we finally got it published this year, and it's just a review of the different ways that the concept of presence has been and is likely to be applied in the area of sexuality, and a call to scholars for how to consider doing some research in the area. My dog, Cedra, passed away in 2005, and I was lucky enough to have a local artist approach me about doing a picture of her a few months really before she passed away, and I started thinking about how valuable and meaningful a picture was to me, even though it's not photorealistic like the photographs I have of her. And that led to me and this colleague writing a paper about all the different ways we try to bring people who we've lost, people who've passed away, back to be with us. And the literature on bereavement, I was surprised in some ways to learn, shows that the most dominant emotion after you lose somebody is not sadness, it's longing for the person who's gone. And so this was inspired by the loss of a pet, that certainly applies with people, and we talked about that in the paper. Another paper with a colleague about the biggest of possible pictures. Maybe the whole thing is presence. We're just living in a computer simulation. There's all kinds of fun popular culture portrayals of this, as you know from The Matrix, and many others, and so we examined the issue. There's a whole serious philosophical and scientific discussion of the simulation argument, as it's called. If you look on the simulationargument.com or .org, you can find all the philosophy papers. And then this isn't published, but a colleague in my department is a recording engineer, and we did a paper at a presence conference a while back about how you can invoke the sense of the musician and the artist being with you when you're listening to music by using certain recording techniques. And then, as I mentioned, the popular culture portrayals I find very interesting. So we have an ongoing project where we're looking at these and many other portrayals where people, often in the future, because it's often in science fiction, experience telepresence. What are the kinds of technologies that are portrayed, and how do the stories end, and what does that tell us about where we're going and what we want as a species, as members of the public. So let me turn to the status of scholarship on all this. Hopefully you get a sense of how broad the focus on telepresence can be. People who work on it come from all kinds of different fields, as you can see here, and as it says, many others. The research has really been increasing. There's a presence bibliography on the ISPR website. Hasn't been updated in about at least a year, and there's 2,300 pieces there. The focus is really on understanding this world, this dynamic, and developing theory to explain how to evoke and understand, and then understand the effects of presence in different contexts. So this is just a list of aspects of the form of a technology presentation to people, or interface with people that are thought, and in some cases there's a lot of evidence, in some cases there's more supposition, thought to influence presence. And again, no need to memorize anything or put this down as gospel, but these are the kinds of things that we look at. Lots of different types of interactivity there. Oral presentation characteristics, visual presentation characteristics on the earlier slide. It should really say unobtrusiveness of the medium, because obviously the point is to keep people from thinking about the technology that they're using, and I'm sure you can think of the application of that in the context of the work that you do. Even the difference between having a presentation say it's live, like when you're watching television, if it says live versus recorded earlier, and how that affects people's sense of the role of technology and experience, and depending on what the activity is, the number of people involved. In terms of the content, social realism is the most important variable, and again, I'll say more about this, but the idea that things that happen realistically, happen as you would expect them to happen, and avoiding media conventions like, I don't know how universal this is, but in the States, if you see a telephone number given on television, it's almost, what are the first three numbers? 555, yeah. So whenever I see that, oh, call me at 373-555, it's television. It breaks that sense of illusion. The media, the nature of the manufactured, artificial, created technology of the medium is brought to the fore. And obviously the nature of the task or activity is going to be very important in determining how likely presence is to happen. Lots of characteristics of the individual user of the technology, their willingness to suspend disbelief is sort of an obvious one. How much experience they have with the medium, their personality type and interests, and all these different things, and age and gender. We found some really interesting, somewhat consistent, but not easily explained gender differences in presence across studies. And I can talk to you about that if you're interested after. There are two big reviews of what causes presence in different contexts. One of them, Christine Youngblood did for the Institute for Defense Analysis, I think it's called, in 2005. And this is just one of the tables, so you're not going to be able to read that. But the things on the left are the factors, including stereo images, haptic force feedback, the field of view, the update rate, texture mapping. And she does a meta-analysis and looks at all different studies that have been done, and as it says in the title of that, that's technical characteristics with consistent findings for presence. So that's worthwhile to look at, and that's available online. And Jim Cummings at Stanford right now is doing a very extensive, he and his group are doing a very all of this is about, though, the causes of presence, not as much about the effects of presence. So that's something that somebody should do. One point I wanted to mention to really emphasize in terms of the causes of presence, the perceptual realism does not seem to be as important as the social realism, as the sort of predictability and consistency and rules-based operation of the setting, of the environment. And a good example of that is this Crayolan cave environment from the 90s. I'm not going to take the time to show you the video, but you can see it's very unrealistic. It looks like a children's crayon drawing of a garden. And I used this several years ago, had a group over in London, and used one of the caves at UCL, there, University College London, and they said this is the most popular environment we have. We have some realistic ones, but it's the Crayolan that everybody likes, and it's because it's simple. You can interact. You pick flowers by using the little joystick grabber thing that you hold while you have the head-mounted equipment, and you're wandering in this five-sided projected cube. And nobody would think it's a real garden, but that's okay. It's the most compelling example. So I wanted to make that point. And here is a really important slide: the effects that have been found in different studies of presence, and again across different contexts. So you don't certainly want or get these effects in every setting, but I'm thinking that when you look at this, you'll see at least some relevance to rehabilitation. So, okay, one last thing about the status of scholarship. How do you measure presence? There's a couple categories. There's the objective measures, when people do things like this, where they reach out, when obviously that's an inappropriate gesture for the technology, then startle and posture and other things like that. That at least is one indicator that people are experiencing presence. People have used physiological measures of various types. Usually that has to go with some sort of other type of measure, but it's a really good reinforcement of the sense that you're accurately measuring people's experiences. And then most common are these kinds of things: questionnaires, interviews, and other subjective responses. And you can see there's a whole bunch of standardized questionnaires, including I can't presence inventory that we've been working on for quite a while, and that's available online. Again, I'm not going to take the time to show you the web page, but I'm happy to give you the. Actually, if you just go to MatthewLombard.com, you'll probably find it. But all of those have their different focuses and uses. Some are longer, some are shorter. You can take items from different measures or subsets of items, and they may very well be useful. Okay, so now let me actually turn to the context of health. Some examples of presence in health where, and this, to me at least, you guys are the experts, but to me at least, they don't touch specifically on rehabilitation, but they certainly apply in the general area of health and medicine. So spatial examples, telesurgery. I don't know, you guys probably are all familiar with the work that's been done where they've actually done operations transatlantically, which I find pretty amazing. So the expert surgeon is in the States, and the patient is in France, and they do it in real time. Or the doctor can be right there next to the patient. There's augmented reality on the left. That's just from a news item from last week. And on the right, a virtual autopsy table. Obviously, that's not rehabilitation. And then there's these whole sets of products that are designed to give you the illusion, and they're marketed a lot to hospitals and other medical facilities, but anywhere where you don't have an actual window, put up a virtual window. Magic. I guess that could be rehabilitative, but you don't normally think of it that way. So social presence examples, again, medicine and health, but not rehabilitation per se. This is training via telepresence, where the panels in the back are actually TV monitors, and the people are not actually looking in through windows. They're looking, they could be anywhere in the world. Or you could be in a virtual world doing training, or you could be in this sort of mixed setting, that's emergency medicine training. And then there's social actor, presence as social actor, where there's the whole mannequin line of products where surgeons and other medical practitioners can practice under rehabilitation, spatial presence. This has been mentioned. The Hoffman work with Snow World and the distraction that it provides, the psychological immersion that it provides to burn patients when they're being treated. Very powerful. Another sort of physical rehabilitation. The one on the left is from this conference from yesterday, I believe it was. So stroke rehabilitation in both of these cases where the patient has to buy into the illusion that they are in the image for it to be most effective. And then prosthetics, again, the one on the right is from yesterday's, one of yesterday's talks. And again, they're reading themselves into the image. And if you think about it, you can't just assume that they're going to do that. And you should, ideally, one would think about ways to make that more likely. Both of the wheelchair sim papers from this conference, the virtual shopping mall, again from this conference from the day before yesterday, I believe. And then, again, this is all spatial. People who are not able to move but can move with brain-computer interface setups like these. And this one's close to my heart as someone with poor vision. This camera that sits, illustrated on the left there, sits on the glasses and then gives you close-up views of things. Obviously, when you're designing a product like that, you have to think, well, how am I going to, you may not use the word or know the literature, but you're going to try to think, well, how can I make this an intuitive, easy, natural experience so that people can look from place to place and not get disoriented and not think, oh, I'm using this clunky technology. And then again, spatial, the use of telepresence for spatial or spatial-oriented rehabilitation. The fear of heights, fear of flying. There's our my introducer. This may obviously this work with virtual rack and other scenarios may touch on social interaction as well, but in these cases it's more spatial. And here's social presence rehabilitation examples. There's the telepsychiatry. There's physical therapy online or via other remote connections. And notice how the text on the left example there would be good, but it's not as good as hearing the person's voice. Other monitoring systems, robotically controlled or stationary, where you have to feel connected to the person at the other location. There's a great program called Pebbles, where they have designed basic teleconferencing equipment to be used by children at home or in the hospital so that they can keep up with their classes, and some really interesting anecdotal evidence in addition to the quantitative evidence about how the students take it all, no problem, just like their peers there in the classroom. And then social phobias and psychological conditions can be well addressed with social telepresence. This is a public speaking sim, so that one hopes that it goes as on the left, but sometimes it goes as on the right. But you get to practice, and the better you do, the better the audience responds. I might have put these under spatial presence, but bugs and dogs are social entities, and you want the person using this technology to believe that the technology, that the characters, the animals are real. There's a bunch of interesting simulation technologies for changing people's attitudes. This is I'm an alcoholic and I go to the party in virtual reality and deal with that reality. There's another example of Skip's work, the artificially intelligent person to go to for psychological problems having to do with PTSD and other related issues. And then there's these people, these next few examples are, you are the avatar, you see yourself, and that has an effect. The manipulation of how you see yourself has an effect on how you, on your attitudes and beliefs and behaviors. In this case, if you see a more fit than you avatar exercising, you are more likely to exercise according to the research by Jared Valence and others. If you have the experience on the left of being the victim of violence, violent abuse, you are more understanding of that issue and see it as a more severe thing. If you see yourself as an older you, you are more likely to make sound financial decisions and put some money away. All of these arguably are really appropriate for rehabilitation. And then finally, the medium as social actor type of presence, where it's a physical thing that you interpret as being a social entity, and the effects of that on rehabilitation. I forget what they call this. Somebody here probably knows. What is it? Yeah, Paro, right? Is he supposed to be a SEAL? Yeah, SEAL. For autism, and interestingly, they found that taking away some of the detail in the face apparently is so again less perceptually realistic, but more sort of just the essentials works better for autistic children. And then the autonomous caregivers, the robot that brings you food and lifts you to the bed or to the bathtub or whatever. So takeaways in my remaining few minutes here. Sorry to be rushing. So telepresence has the potential to be a very important mediating variable for all those types of effects that I had on that slide and others. And yet, somebody said yesterday, I was struck by, we're all here because of virtual reality and the belief that it can be a compelling way to treat people. And yet it's surprising to me how rarely presence is mentioned, not just here, but in literature in general. And even less often is it really studied systematically. So my key takeaway here is that adding presence measures and thinking about presence as you do your research will help understand both rehabilitation and presence. At least that's my humble hope and belief. And then I'll say something about this in a second, but it's really easy to connect with the presence community, and I hope that you do. I really have enjoyed being at this conference, and I know other people who work with presence would as well, and I think many of you would enjoy the presence conferences. Just before I mention something about the community, how to use presence in shaping virtual rehabilitation experiences. And again, I say humbly, and you all, I'd be very interested in having a discussion about this and shaping this to be more useful to you. But using it as a guiding principle seems, just thinking about the idea of presence in any sort of virtual technology, virtual experience that you're designing seems like it would be useful. In general, hide the technology, limit the clutter. And I know many of you do that without thinking about presence, but that is a key aspect of how presence works. Don't let them see the man behind the curtain, the equipment behind the curtain. For instance, using small wireless light sensors, things like that. Using vivid, engaging, multimodal, naturalistic stimuli, emphasizing the social realism, the predictability of the experience. And again, don't assume that presence is happening. It's easy to say, well, and I've read it in papers, not here per se, but in looking at the literature, people say, well, we know, there's a sign at the beginning of the article that says presence has been associated with these technologies, and people experience it when they use virtual reality. Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So it's good to ask and to measure it and report it. So again, to connect to the presence community, we've had 14 great conferences. I've been to 13 of them, so I can say that they are great around the world. And adding a presence measure, even a less systematic presence measure to almost any paper I've heard at this conference would make it of great interest to the presence community. And there just coincidentally is a presence conference coming up next year in Vienna in March, and the deadline, which had been what is today, the 29th? It had been tomorrow. It has been moved back to September 25th. So I'm happy to say, if you have any work that you think would fit into Presence conferences and would like to go visit Vienna, you have until September 25th. And all the information is on the ISPR website, ispr.info. I'll put that up in a second on the last slide. And then Skip mentioned when he introduced me, there's this Presence News. It used to be called the Presence L listserv. Now it's ISPR Presence News, and it's on a WordPress blog. So I put the material on the blog, and then it gets distributed if you like it on Facebook or Twitter, or every time something's posted in your email, or a daily digest, or a weekly digest. There's all kinds of ways to get the ISPR Presence News, and it is free. And I'm kind of shocked to realize that I've posted over 4,500 things since 1999 on that list. So I don't take the title of Presence God, but I will definitely say that I've been interested in the concept for a long time and continue to be. So there's my contact information, and I'm here and would be happy to have discussions with you now or today. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions if you'd like to ask.
And since I'm visually impaired, maybe you can
point out
calling on people. If there are people.
There we go.
Hi, thanks for the great talk, very enlightening. I find it interesting when you mentioned the 555 phone number, because from what I think I remember, this number was created, set aside especially to be used in the media by television and movies, so that people wouldn't hear the phone number and then try it out, and then you know, it turned out to be a real phone number. So this was reserved.
Yeah.
And now that we sort of know the trick, to say it sort of shatters the illusion. So just to say that there's definitely a very subjective, even cognitive element to
that's
feeling of presence.
That's absolutely true, and I'm glad you knew that example, and I agree with you, and that's my understanding of the history of it too. I think it may be that they first had the problem, and then they decided, we're going to have to set aside some space here. But it always just rings false to me. And actually, you can expand from that to just the idea of poorly written dialogue. I'm often aware, especially in episodic television, they're trying to catch you up to the story. The people don't need to tell each other that. They already know what's going on. They're doing it for my benefit, and that breaks the illusion. So you're right, there's all kinds of complicated cognitive things that have to happen. It's not just, gee, am I seeing in 3D or wide field of view or narrow or whatever.
Thanks.
I have a question about the presence metrics. We've used some of them consistently, and we've used them repeatedly over weeks of training. So we have protocols where people train on devices for 16 sessions over 8 weeks, and we were curious to know if the sense of presence degraded. But it was difficult to use the instruments and feel they're long, they're a little cumbersome.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could speak to any of the work that might have been looked at as sort of maintained over time.
Yeah, there's two interesting issues that you raise. One is sort of the novelty effect, and there is definitely a concern in the community about too many studies just measure, well, you've just been in this virtual experience, how much presence did you experience? And then, that's it. Next time they use it, the thrill is gone and the magic is, it's like going to the planetarium and the first time, it's amazing, and then you sort of know how it works after that, and it's less impressive. So that is a concern. There is some evidence that there is a fall off depending on the setting and the context. I think if you create enough, not distraction, but if you change the scenarios enough so that it keeps people focused on that away from a repetitive experience, and of course that really may go against what you try to do in rehabilitation, but to the extent that you can change the colors of things or the type of fruit or whatever the thing is, that may help, and we just don't know enough about it. And so more studies, that kind of information is really useful. Then the other issue about the measures, I definitely agree that the temporal presence inventory is 42 questions or something, and that's on the longer side, but a lot of them are that long. And the shorter ones are criticized because you can't ask 3 questions and expect people to get a full sense of it. And I think the trick is to use at least a few of the standardized measures so that you can do comparisons across studies, but then supplement it with summary, made up instruments that, items that fit your context. Because in trying to design a measure that works for social presence and spatial presence and for, television and virtual reality and video gaming and, these kind of scenarios that you use, it's just really difficult to find a question that will still hold its meaning when it's abstracted enough to work across, make sense across all those environments. So I think the answer is to pick at least some of the actual sort of core questions. In the case of the temporal presence inventory, there's factor loading is associated with each set of items, and you can pick the top or the second item because it has the strongest loading on that factor and not use the others to make it so that when you keep repeating it, people won't get sick of it and it just won't take up so much time. So I definitely agree with that.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. So I think I'm going to expand a little bit about what you were just talking about with my question. When I started in virtual reality, and I think I go way back because they were pretty much creating Crayola Land when I was that lab.
Yeah. I remember it was new when I saw it. So.
Yeah. So I remember us arguing then that if you're not fully immersed, it's not virtual. And there's been that, over time, that change in attitude about how essential presence is to having a virtual experience. And there's, as you were saying, almost a continuum of presence. You'll have a different level of presence with every type of technology you use. And I'm wondering if anybody's looked at the validity of the virtual experience based on the level of presence, or is that something people are concerned about?
Do you mean specifically with VR versus other technologies?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, a lot of it depends on the instantiation of it, the specific equipment being used and the content that people are using. But in general, there's a strong belief. In fact, the subtitle of the MIT press journal called Presence is Teleoperators in Virtual Environments. And the focus in that journal started and continues really to be on virtual reality as sort of the gold standard for people experiencing presence. So I think there still is that sense. It's just that now so many of the other media that we used to say, oh, those couldn't evoke presence. In fact, there's a funny story at one of the presence conferences. Mel Slater, who's a well-known, some of you may know the name, well-known presence person, got really unhappy and upset at a talk that was given and was well received about how the iPhone video screen, the original one, the little bitty one, could evoke a sense of presence in people. And everybody was agreeing, and the woman who was presenting, was a student of mine, former student of mine, she was presenting this work and saying, look, the people respond and say they're having a sense of engagement and immersion with this little video screen. He said, that's it. That's not virtual reality, that's just a different kind of experience. And yet now, everybody's watching on their iPad, and it just amazes me. I'm still, in part, I guess, because of my bad vision, I want to watch on the 50-inch plasma with the surround sound, and I really want to be immersed and feel presence. But people are obviously experiencing presence with, Skyping from their tablet and sitting in the coffee shop with their little iPhone and doing it. I think it's a much broader concept now because of the technology. And who knows what's going to happen with the Oculus Rift and Google Glass and other things like it. So it's a new world.
Thanks.
Just a question. Many of the examples you gave, also on one of the last slides, you said that presence is associated with naturalistic appeal. But maybe there's also a way to feel present in totally abstract and highly fictive worlds. So maybe you can allude a bit on that.
Yeah. I think that's true. There's this confusion about perceptual realism and social realism where in fact, I get this on Facebook. There's a group that's doing a restoration of the Star Trek The Next Generation bridge. I don't know if any of you have heard about this. They found it in the Paramount warehouse. they've taken the bridge and all the chairs and the equipment, they're trying to make it something that will be at the heart of a museum. And so they're going to all these different conferences around the country. They're having people from the public, be able to sit in the chair and play being Captain Picard or whatever. And they always post these pictures of all these people doing it. And I think that does not exist. There is no such thing as the Starship Enterprise. And yet, if you give me even just a vivid picture, especially a navigable one, especially an immersive one or an HMD or something, then I'll feel like I'm on the bridge of the Enterprise. So it doesn't have to be socially realistic in the sense that it corresponds to a reality that exists. So it's not so far then to say, well, maybe it doesn't even have to match the sort of the rules of physics that we're used to experiencing. So you can go into Second Life and fly around, and if all the other factors are in line, then you may feel a sense of presence, even though obviously you can't do that in real life. And there is a app that somebody wrote for Apple for the iOS for the store that is called Geometry Porn, I think it's called, and it's all drawings in the most abstract shapes. There's nothing. I mean, it's incredibly suggestive, but there's no correspondence to physical reality. The colors barely, there's pinks and beiges and stuff, but there's movement, but it's not directly, obviously sexual, and Apple turned it down. They said, you can't put this in our store because even though it's just shapes, people will see things in it. And I mean, we're just so able to do that I think it doesn't have to be, it can be a very abstract experience, a very abstract presentation, and people will read things into it if you could just give people, I mean, why was Pong so popular? I mean, there was no detail to that. It's very abstract, but very compelling, and you feel like, oh, I hit it. So definitely. And I think more research on that kind of thing is going to be really interesting and valuable. And I'm not sure how it applies in your case, but I think sometimes in designing a scenario or an environment to look as realistic as possible, it ends up looking less compelling than not trying to make it match something that you're familiar with in reality. So it may be a really good strategy to try.
Hello, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the current state of the art of measuring presence in mixed reality environments.
Yeah, that is a good question because it's getting complicated. It's very hard to measure something that is sort of fragile and disappears easily. In fact, when you're sitting there in a movie that's too scary, you can bring yourself out of presence by just saying, oh, to yourself, it's just a movie. Just look down, look at the person next to you who's chomping the popcorn or whatever. So there's some debate from the beginning of the literature of presence, I think, about whether it's something that happens at instances, and then when you ask people at the end of the experience how much presence you experience, they sort of summarize, well, a lot of the time, a lot of the instances I was experiencing presence, so I'll say a lot, versus how much presence are you experiencing right now, a lot versus a little. It's not clear how much it varies on a continuum versus it's a cumulative, accretion of experiences. And so I say this because as soon as you ask somebody during an experience, are you experiencing presence? Well, not now. You killed it. And so it makes it really hard to measure. There's, it was on one of the slides that I didn't mention it, there's this thing called breaks in presence, where it's Mel Slater actually and his group used the idea of creating purposeful breaks and then measuring people's various physiological responses, and then later their memory of the sort of trajectory of the experience. They could draw a little drawing of it, and you could say, well, when we turned off all power on the head-mounted display, their physiology changed, and later when they marked the scorecard, sort of, they indicated that, oh yeah, I felt back in the lab then. So people are trying to come up with creative ways of not breaking the experience and still getting an accurate read on how much presence people are experiencing. And in mixed reality, obviously, it gets even more complicated because part of what they're seeing is real, is actual. And so you can't have them fill out a questionnaire as they're experiencing it, but I think what it comes down to is the same sort of questionnaire items can work, but again, they need to be modified so that you're not asking a question that doesn't match the kind of technology they were using. Because obviously, how real did it seem? Well, it was real, but you mean how seamlessly did the elements that weren't part of the reality, that experience, merge with the parts that were? You have to think of elegant ways of asking those things. It's one of the hard things about studying presence, that it gets, as the technologies change, it gets harder and harder you have to keep adjusting your ways of asking questions. And one thing I should say, too often people who study presence work on all these quantitative, closed-ended, standardized measures, and I'm a big believer in that. I definitely support that. But they don't also ask the question, well, what was it like? You know, and we've done some work recently where we actually tell people, this is what presence is. Here's a sort of an easy to understand, digested, definition of it. Have you ever had this experience? And what was it like? And you get some really fascinating answers, and I think that's going to help us define better of the standardizations.
Okay, I think we're at the end of our time. We have a break now until 10:30. Let's have a last round of applause.
Before you go over for a coffee break, I just want to mention two things. We do have the sheets for voting for the best platform presentation. It's two-sided, and Maria has asked that you choose your top 3. So if you want to rank your top 3 or just circle 3 that you really like, that's fine. And then Maria and I will calculate them during panel discussion. The other request I had was that the panel discussion be moved up a little because of flight issues. So what we're doing today, the posters are actually going to be broken down now. Lunch will be put into this space. So what we'd like is that you get your lunch, bring it back to the tables, and we'll start the panel discussion at 1 o'clock instead of 1:30. So that'll move everything up half an hour. Okay, enjoy coffee. We'll see you back here.